The door gives a soft metallic sigh as it opens, releasing a faint breath of stale air that has waited decades to escape. The room waits in stillness, a vacuum of forgotten moments. Dust floats like muted snowfall through a single broken beam of afternoon light. The air carries the kind of quiet that presses into the skin, reminding the investigator, Elias Cade, that memory has weight. It rests on everything here. The worn carpet, the collapsed bookshelf, the outline where a body once lay. Time feels paused, held in a fragile shell that might break if he moves too fast. He steps inside. The soft crunch beneath his shoe is deliberate, cautious. He pauses again, letting silence settle in around him, the same way it did 40 years ago when he was too young to be assigned to the case, but old enough to remember its static presence in the precinct. This is the apartment where Liora Halden, age 28, a research assistant at the Georgia Geoscience Institute, was found. She lived quietly, worked long nights, kept a modest circle, and left behind questions no one could cleanly answer. Her name echoes somewhere in the room without sound, just an impression. Liora, a name that feels like a draft of cold air. Elias walks slowly, treating the objects as if they were faint silhouettes of her final hours. A lamp left tilted on the table, a cracked ceramic cup holding its own stillness, an overturned notebook long since unreadable. Nothing is violent here. Nothing is loud. Just the thin residue of an unsolved absence. He kneels near the faded chalk outline. His fingers hover above the floor. "Missed something," he murmurs under his breath. Not to anyone present, not even to himself fully, but to the memory of the room. His voice sounds hesitant, as if spoken through layers of fog. The carpet gives off a faint odor of dust and time. Paper rustles somewhere, responding to the slight shift in air. Elias rises, scanning the room's perimeter. The window is cracked, its latch still bearing the same old scrape. A forgotten file box sits on a side table, edges collapsing slightly inward. He doesn't touch it yet. Behind him, the corridor hums lightly with building ventilation. Outside, the city moves with ordinary rhythm. But here, the world feels stalled. This was the site of a case that made no progress in 1994, one that collected dust through leadership transitions, technology upgrades, retirements. It became an archive item, referenced occasionally in training sessions, never in press briefings. Liora Halden had been bright. That much everyone agreed on. Born in a small coastal town in Oregon, moved to Georgia for graduate work, fascinated by sediment layers and river formations. She documented everything meticulously, filling journals with sketches of strata, timelines of erosion, field observations. A person driven by order meeting an end that left none. The old photographs had shown her lying near the fireplace. No fire had been lit that night. Her notes were scattered across the floor as if time itself had exhaled and pushed them outward. The investigators in the 90s tried to reconstruct her final hours through routine questions. Did she have visitors? Conflicts? A late-night schedule? Nothing formed a complete picture. Elias looks at the fireplace now. A thin layer of soot clings inside, untouched for years. He imagines her kneeling there, writing or perhaps thinking. Maybe she had paused in silence, much like the silence holding the room now. He takes a careful step toward the file box. His hands hover over its lid. He waits. The dust shifts again, as if warning him not to disturb what has settled, but he lifts the lid anyway. Inside, the documents are stacked loosely. Precinct reports, labeled photographs, a brittle envelope. He glances through them with restrained movements. Each sheet feels familiar, yet strange. Details he has read many times but never in the presence of the actual room. Here, they feel different, heavier, as though the setting amplifies their meaning. He stops at a single photograph of Liora's desk. A pen lies across a page mid-sentence. The writing is partially obscured by shadow. Elias narrows his eyes, sensing the subtle pull of something unresolved. He moves the light slightly and studies the ink, but the original page is long gone. Only the photo remains. He whispers again, "Something here." The floor creaks softly behind him, though no one is there. It's just the old structure adjusting to his presence, or maybe adjusting to memory. He steps deeper into the room as the first heading closes around him like a curtain being drawn back. A forgotten scene, a forgotten question, and now a return. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. The case did not reopen because of nostalgia, nor due to any administrative push. It reopened because of a small, misfiled object found during a digital archive conversion, an anomaly in data indexing that flagged something once overlooked: a microcassette. It had been tucked into the back cover of one of Liora's research journals, sealed inside a protective sleeve. For 4 decades, no one noticed it. The journal had been cataloged, scanned, and stored, but the cassette remained hidden in the spine's narrow fold. Only when the binding began to deteriorate during digitization did the cassette slide out, clattering softly onto a technician's desk. Elias received the call the same day. The message was brief, almost hesitant. "Sir, you should come see this." He listened to the cassette in a controlled environment at the precinct. The recording quality was thin, aged by magnetic wear. Liora's voice, calm, measured with slight coastal softness, spoke for 18 minutes about an unnamed observation she planned to report the next morning. She referenced a pattern in the data, a shift in the usual field log, and someone she described as concerned, maybe too aware. Her tone changed near the end, a short pause, a soft breath, then, "I think I'm being watched." The sentence was faint, nearly swallowed by static but unmistakable. That single line changed everything. Within hours, Elias had authorization to reopen the file. By morning, he was standing once again inside Liora's apartment, letting the gravity of the discovery draw him into the past. The department assigned him full autonomy. The case was considered low risk, low profile, a quiet investigation for a quiet man nearing retirement. He never thought of retirement, not today. Back in the apartment, he retrieves the microcassette from his coat pocket. It sits in his palm like an artifact recovered from a submerged vessel. The air in the room feels different now, aware of the evidence he carries. He places the cassette on the old table, beside the brittle envelope he found earlier. The envelope contains a single item, a faded field photograph of a riverbank, marked with coordinates. Liora had taken it 3 days before her final entry. Behind her handwriting, shadows stretch across sediment layers, forming a subtle shape that the original investigators dismissed as irrelevant. But paired with the cassette's mention of a pattern, it now feels deliberate. He arranges the photo and cassette side by side. The dust motes spin slowly above them, drifting through the dim light in a rhythm that feels almost human. Elias opens his notebook and writes concise observations. No flourish, no speculation, just lines of measured detail, each separated by careful spacing. The pen scratches lightly. The sound echoes. A knock at the door breaks the stillness. The sound is soft, hesitant, almost unsure if it's welcome. Elias turns. Officer Myra Lane stands quietly, holding a thin folder. She offers it to him without stepping inside. "Digital unit sent this up," she says, voice low. He nods, "Thanks." She lingers a moment, glancing into the room as if sensing its tension. "Feels cold in here," she whispers. "Old rooms do that." She leaves. The door closes, returning the room to its suspended quiet. Elias opens the folder. Inside is a transcript of the cassette, the digital team's interpretation. Several segments remain uncertain due to static, but the final lines are clear. Not sure who to trust if something happens. Look at the river logs. River logs, the photograph, the coordinates. He sits down, absorbing the linkage. The evidence forms a new framework, subtle, not bold, but present. This is why the case reopened. A cassette lost in a spine, a voice resurfaced, a pattern that survived time. He rises, moving toward the window. The cracked glass reflects a faint silhouette of him standing where she once stood. He looks out over the quiet street below and whispers a fragment of thought he doesn't fully intend for anyone to hear. "I won't miss it again." Investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. Elias returns to the precinct with the old box, the photo, the cassette, and a renewed sense of measured urgency. His office is dim, lit by a single desk lamp. The bulb hums softly, casting a pool of warm light over the scattered reports. The blinds are partially closed, allowing thin slits of late afternoon sun to draw parallel lines across the room. He begins systematically, first the original reports, then supplemental interviews, then evidence logs. He approaches each document with calm precision, as though excavating layers of sediment. The first report chronicles Leora's discovery by a neighbor who noticed her door slightly ajar. The timeline is clean, but Elias notes the neighbor's statement mentioned seeing a figure in the hallway earlier that evening, a detail dismissed due to lack of clarity. The description had been vague, tall maybe, hard to say. While inconclusive, it now feels like a stone worth turning again. He marks it. The next document is a field notebook inventory. Liora kept several journals, but one, Volume 6, was missing during the initial investigation. The microcassette had been found in Volume 5. Volume 6 remained unaccounted for. He circles the line with careful pressure, the ink forming a dark, deliberate loop. He flips through photographs, the apartment, the desk, the scattered notes. One image catches his attention again, Leora's pen lying diagonally across the page. The handwriting beneath it shows the beginning of a word. Elias enlarges the printed photo using a magnifier. The fragment appears to start with 3 letters, Rev, perhaps revised, Review, or River. River. He sets the photo aside, but keeps it within reach. He then examines the field logs the transcript mentioned. Liora had spent the last week studying sediment near the Chattahoochee River bend, a site known for slow erosion patterns and subtle seasonal shifts. Her logs were precise, aligned to time stamps, except for one entry, an observation made at dusk, marked with a hesitant question mark. She rarely used question marks in scientific notes. He reads the entry 3 times. It describes a shift in alignment along the bank, something she intended to confirm the next morning. He writes, check alignment patterns at coordinates. The scent of paper in the room thickens. As he continues through the archive, a small detail appears in a witness interview he barely remembered. A colleague of Leora's mentioned she had a concerned exchange with someone the night before her final journal entry. The colleague didn't know who it was, just that Liora had appeared unsettled afterward. He underlines exchange. The documents spread across the desk form a quiet constellation. Each point is small, understated, but when viewed together, they start to resemble a shape, not yet clear but forming. He leans back, letting silence settle around him. The lamp hums. The room holds its breath. Somewhere in the stillness, Elias Cade senses it, the faint outline of the thing they missed. Not a dramatic revelation, Not a convenient coincidence. Something simple, something logical, something that waited 40 years for someone to notice. He exhaled, slow and controlled, and whispers. The river logs, the missing journal, the figure in the hallway. A pattern. A thread. He leans forward again, placing the photograph of the riverbank at the center of his desk. The investigation, once quiet and suspended, begins to move. The list of potential suspects begins forming not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet, methodical accumulation. Names lifted from Liora's journals, her work logs, phone records from the 90s, and the thin stack of interviews stored in the precinct's old microfilm files. Elias approaches each name with clinical patience, withholding assumptions, letting silence guide his judgment. He starts with Jonas Worth, a senior researcher from the institute who supervised Liora's fieldwork. His archived interview reveals a tone of outward reassurance but subtle defensiveness. Jonas mentioned that Liora had been overly focused on a particular data cluster before her passing, dismissing it as routine drift. Elias notes that Jonas' description contrasts with Liora's measured excitement in the cassette, a difference in tone, a difference in interpretation. Not incriminating, just misaligned. Jonas also claimed he was at a departmental seminar the night Liora died. The attendance records confirm it, though the timeline offers a 1-hour window unaccounted for. Elias marks it, not as accusation, but as an open interval in an otherwise tight schedule. Next is Marlon Grieve, a neighbor from Liora's apartment building. In her interview, Marlon described Liora as quiet, polite, kept to herself. But Marlon had also claimed to hear soft voices in the corridor the night before Liora was found. Her statement was deemed unreliable at the time due to her tendency to misinterpret ordinary building noises. Still, Elias underlines the mention of voices, pairing it with the colleague's statement about the concerned exchange. Voices, corridor, exchange. Then there is Tobin Hale, a graduate student who once assisted Liora during field measurements. Tobin had withdrawn from the institute months after Liora's death. In his interview, he admitted she had confronted him over a miscalculated data set 3 weeks earlier. He insisted the matter was minor, but the transcript shows a small pause before he answered the next question, an uncertainty that today reads differently. Elias reads the line again, listening to the hesitance inside the silence between Tobin's words. He lifts another file, Calder Niles, a project coordinator responsible for logging Liora's equipment checkouts. Calder had interacted with her frequently due to her late-night field visits. His alibi was that he was out of state visiting his father. Travel receipts confirmed it. Even so, Calder's notes on the equipment logs reveal a discrepancy. One missing tripod the week of her death, mislabeled as returned. Elias adds it to his constellation of anomalies. He moves through each file calmly, his internal voice measured, restrained. The suspects do not emerge in bold ink. They appear in faint outlines, drawn slowly through cross-reference and context. A final name reappears, one that has lingered in the background. Eamon Firel, a visiting researcher whose collaboration overlapped briefly with Liora's work. Eamon's interview is striking for its brevity. He claimed minimal contact with her, yet Liora's journals mention him twice, both entries underlined, unusual for her typically neutral annotations. The underlined entries read, EF asked about alignment shift. Unclear why he insisted on seeing logs. Elias circles both lines. Underlining usually means emphasis. Emphasis usually means significance. And significance, even if subtle, often leads somewhere. He leans back in his chair. The suspects do not form a dramatic cast. They form a quiet spectrum of proximity. Each has a reason, some small, some structured, to be drawn into Liora's work. Each leaves behind an alibi. Each carries a motive linked not to passion but to data, pressure, misunderstanding, or ambition. The room feels steady, almost contemplative. Elias breathes in the paper-scented air, the lingering dust that rises when old files are disturbed. The lamp's glow softens, stretching shadows across the reports. He whispers, not motive, alignment. Because in cases like this, motive is often secondary. What matters is the path that connects each person to the sediment logs Liora guarded, logs that recorded something quiet, not dramatic, yet important enough for her to hide a cassette. He returns to the evidence, letting the suspects settle like sediment layers. Each layer holds clues. Each layer holds tension just beneath still waters. Clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The room falls into a deeper quiet as Elias begins cross-referencing details, the kind of work that requires slow breathing and deliberate thought, where nothing leaps forward and everything must be coaxed patiently from the past. He places the riverbank photograph beside Liora's field logs. The coordinates match the site of her final recorded measurement. He examines the note marked with a question mark, the dusk reading. The measurements show a subtle deviation. The alignment of a sediment line shifted slightly eastward, contrary to seasonal patterns. It's small, almost negligible, yet significant in the world Liora studied. He writes deviation noted, significance unclear. Next, he overlays Jonah's seminar timeline with Liora's final hours. The 1-hour gap stands out again. Not proof, not even strong suspicion, but a quiet inconsistency. He pairs it with Marlon Greaves' statement. Marlon claimed to hear voices in the corridor around the same time. Her description was fragmented. Two people, maybe Tone, felt uneasy. He reads the phrase Tone felt uneasy twice. Tone is not evidence, but Tone, when placed against Liora's cassette message about being watched, forms a gentle connection. Still, he remains clinical. He writes, voice report unverified. He shifts to Tobin Hale's file. The miscalculated dataset had created tension between him and Liora. His interview transcript shows a long pause when asked if he had visited her apartment after their disagreement. He eventually said, "No, I didn't." The pause, a small emotional hesitation, suggests something unresolved but not necessarily involvement. Elias adds, emotional tension noted contextual. He moves to Calder's equipment records. The missing tripod seems insignificant, yet Liora often used tripods for dusk measurements when natural light forced longer exposures. A missing tripod on the week of her final observation could mean she improvised, or that someone else used it. No conclusion, only possibility. Finally, he turns to the name that keeps resurfacing, Eamon Firel. Eamon's interest in the alignment shift feels disproportionate for a visitor with limited overlap in research. Liora underlined his name. Underlining means emphasis. Emphasis means attention. And attention, in this measured, scientific world, usually emerges from concern or caution. Elias checks Eamon's travel logs. Eamon claimed he departed the state 2 days before Liora's death. Records confirm his departure, but his return date is unclear. A small ambiguity in flight logs shows a corrected entry, something overwritten manually. He writes, return date inconsistent, verify. The clues linger, none point directly, none accuse, they simply wait. He sits in silence, sensing Liora's presence not as a person but as a pattern, her meticulous habits, her careful handwriting, her precision. Her world was built on alignment. When something shifted, she noticed. and she noticed something before she died. He lifts her journal again, flipping to her second-to-last entry. A line stands out. "Someone reviewed my logs without permission, not sure who." He compares this with the equipment logs. Calder had marked a late-night inventory check the same evening, a check he described as routine. Yet his handwriting appears rushed, unlike the neat script in earlier entries. He writes, "Inventory timing conflicts with stated routine." A small inconsistency, another grain of sediment settling into place. He steps away from the desk, packing slowly across the dim room. The blinds cast soft bars of shadow on his coat. The air feels thicker now, as if the clues form their own pressure. Then he returns to the photograph. Something in the shadows along the riverbank, barely perceptible, catches his eye. He brings it closer to the lamp. The faint shape he dismissed earlier resembles a second tripod impression beside the main one. 2 tripod marks. Liora only used one. He marks it carefully. Secondary tripod impression unknown. A breath leaves him, barely audible. He lifts the microcassette from his desk and studies it again, listening not to the words but to the pauses between them. Liora speaks with precision except when she mentions the alignment shift. There, her voice hesitates, just slightly, as though weighing whether to speak further. Perhaps she was uncertain. Perhaps she sensed caution was needed. Perhaps she already felt observed. Elias writes in crisp strokes. Emotional hesitation aligns with deviation in measurement. The phrase feels heavy, the logic connecting emotion to evidence. But that is often how cases unfold, not through dramatic breakthroughs but through the merging of subtle human tension and factual detail. He steps back from the desk again, letting everything remain scattered in its deliberate arrangement. Each clue is small. Each clue is quiet. Each clue carries its own emotional echo. He breathes in the scent of old paper and whispers. "The second tripod." The words trail off, suspended in the quiet. He sits again, staring at the constellation of anomalies. The emotional conflicts among the suspects, professional friction, unspoken disagreements, cautious curiosity, now intertwine with the inconsistencies. Jonas had reasons to downplay unusual data. Tobin had lingering tension. Calder had mismatched logs. Marlin heard voices. Eamon showed unusual interest. None stand alone. None dominate. They form a slow accumulation, the kind that builds until a shape becomes inevitable. He writes one final line for the night. "Patterns do not lie, people sometimes do." Then he closes his notebook gently, the sound blending into the soft hum of the lamp. The clues do not shout. They do not demand. They simply breathe, waiting for the next step. Morning arrives with a muted palette, soft gray through clouded windows, a quiet that feels deliberate. Elias returns to his desk, the files exactly as he left them. The photograph sits at the center, a silent anchor. Around it lies the constellation he formed the night before, small clues, steady patterns, emotional shadows. Today, he intends to follow their alignment with calm, disciplined steps. He begins by rechecking the equipment logs. Calder Niles' signature on the disputed entry is slightly smudged, the pen pressure inconsistent. Most would consider it unimportant, yet Elias reads handwriting the way some read weather. The smallest shift can signal an approaching change. He compares Calder's logs across several months. All are neat except the one that coincides with Leora's final field day. Still, inconsistency is not guilt, only a doorway. He turns next to Jonah's Worth seminar records. The 1-hour gap remains. He highlights it again, then sets it aside. Jonah's motive feels thin, tied only to academic pressure. Not impossible, but lacking the subtle weight that often accompanies truth. Then he examines Tobin Hale's timeline. Tobin's emotional pause during his interview stands out, but the context suggests discomfort rather than concealment. Friction between mentor and student is common. Miscalculated data creates tension, not tragedy. Elias sets the file down. He moves to Marlon Greaves' witness statement. Her mention of voices is noteworthy but not definitive. Sound drifts strangely in old hallways. Memory drifts even more. He marks it quietly, residual clue. Finally, he revisits Eamon Firal's travel logs. The altered return date bothers him. A single overwritten digit. It feels deliberate but not elaborate, simple, almost careless. Eamon's underlined references in Leora's journals suggest she regarded his interest as unusual. Not threatening, just unusual. Elias studies the alteration again, then glances at the secondary tripod impression in the riverbank photograph. 2 tripods at the site, 2 sets of feet, 2 observers, or 1 observer and someone unseen. He pauses, breath steady. Then something shifts, not in the evidence, but in the connections forming quietly between them. The least suspected person is often the one who lived closest to the patterns yet stayed farthest from suspicion. Someone neither dramatic nor highlighted. Someone present in the details but rarely in the questions. He turns slowly to the inventory logs once more. Calder Niles, the coordinator responsible for equipment, the person who handled checkouts and returns, the person whose signature appeared on the late-night sheet, the one with direct access to Leora's tools, someone with no documented conflict, no noted tension, no interviews beyond routine administrative checks. Calder, the quiet presence in the background of every page. Elias places Calder's file at the center. He reads the equipment log again, particularly the missing tripod. Calder marked it as returned, but the handwriting suggests it was written at a different time from the surrounding entries. Under magnification, the ink tone is fractionally lighter. A minor detail, but paired with the second tripod mark at the riverbank, it grows. He flips to Leora's final journal entry. The line reads, "Someone reviewed my logs without permission, not sure who. Someone with access to equipment, someone with access to logs, someone who could approach unnoticed." Calder. Elias aligns the facts. Leora's final dusk reading shows a deviation. She planned to recheck the next morning. She sensed observation. A second tripod was at the site. Calder logged equipment late at night. His handwriting shifted on the crucial entry. He had access to journals, logs, and tools. And he had no alibi listed, because no one thought to ask. Elias closes his eyes briefly, not in triumph, in quiet acknowledgement. The least suspected person was the one hidden behind routine. He retrieves Calder's personnel file. A small note sits at the bottom, transferred 2 months after incident. New position, archival assistant. A role giving him oversight of archived materials including field logs, including Liora. Elias exhales softly. He contacts the archive department. The conversation is brief, muted. Has Calder Niles accessed the old river logs recently? A pause. Yes, last week, for maintenance review. Maintenance review. 40 years after the case. Elias arrives at the archive facility quietly. The room is climate-controlled, rows of shelves lit by narrow overhead lights. Dust is minimal. Sound is absorbed into soft insulation. Calder stands near a workstation, reviewing a binder. He looks up, expression polite, unaware of the shift unfolding around him. "Morning," Calder says, voice steady. Elias returns a small nod. "Need to check some logs." Calder gestures with calm familiarity. "Of course, let me help." The ease in his tone matches the ease with which he once signed equipment forms. Routine, predictable. Elias watches his movements, controlled, careful, too careful. He places the riverbank photograph on the table. Calder glances at it, expression neutral at first, then a small, almost imperceptible tightening at the corner of his eye. That is the moment Elias knows. Not because of confession, not because of reaction, but because emotional stillness shifts differently in those who carry truth. He keeps his voice low. "Were you at the river site that evening?" Calder hesitates, not a long pause, a measured one. "I don't recall." The hesitation is enough. Elias waits in silence. Silence often encourages truth more than questions. Calder's gaze lowers. His breath becomes shallow. "Liora was worried," he murmurs. "She thought someone was misreading her logs. I tried to help her, but she was convinced something was wrong." Elias listens. Calder continues, voice barely above the hum of the ventilation. "I went to check the alignment myself. At dusk, I took the second tripod." His hands tremble slightly. "She arrived unexpectedly, thought I was interfering. She panicked, stepped back, slipped." He swallows, the air thinning between words. "I tried to explain, tried to help, but she fell, hit the ground hard." Elias remains still, letting the quiet absorb the weight of the admission. Calder's voice cracks, not from emotion but from controlled restraint slipping. "I didn't know what to do. I left. Returned the tripod later, adjusted the log. I thought it would ease the situation, but it only buried it." The truth settles without dramatic flourish. Not an act of intention, an accident entangled in fear. Not malice, misjudgment. Not a planned act, an unplanned moment buried under layers of silence. The least suspected person was not the one with anger or rivalry. It was the one with quiet responsibility and quiet panic. Elias records the statement without commentary. Facts remain facts. Emotion stays at the edges. He escorts Calder calmly. No raised voice. No confrontation. The corridor echoes only with soft steps. The case, after 40 years, finds its explanation not in conflict, but in a single moment of uncertainty. A shift as subtle as the sediment alignment Liora noticed in the river. A small shift. A quiet truth. A devastating detail hidden in routine. Ends with moral reflection. Truth isn't always visible on surface. The room in the precinct feels different that evening. The lamp hums softly, casting a warm circle of light over the closed files. Elias sits with his notebook open but writes nothing. The pen rests between his fingers without movement. The case is solved. Mechanically solved. Procedurally closed. Yet the air carries a muted heaviness. He thinks of Liora's precision, her careful observations, her patient method, her attention to subtle patterns. She noticed the shift in the sediment before anyone else. She noticed the presence of someone near her work. She noticed the silence around her more clearly than the investigators who followed. Truth, he realizes, often lives in places where the surface appears still. A second tripod impression. A smudged entry in a log. A faint hesitation in a voice. A line under a name. A pattern that once seemed ordinary. These details linger beneath the noise of routines, waiting for someone to see them without rushing, without assuming, without shaping them into something louder than they are. Justice feels steady now, but not triumphant. The mechanical process of closing a case does not answer the human part, the part about why people hide mistakes, why silence grows, why fear reshapes memory. Elias rests his hands on the file box. He imagines Liora standing at the riverbank, writing in fading light, tracing the alignment with the same calm he now carries. Her work was quiet, devoted. Her final observation, an understated anomaly, became the thread that led here. He closes the notebook gently. Outside the window, the last light of day shifts across the street, touching the buildings with muted gold. People pass by, unaware of the quiet resolution unfolding inside the walls. Elias stands, breathing in the stillness. He turns off the lamp, leaving the room in near darkness. As he steps into the corridor, he whispers, barely audible, a fragment meant for no one in particular. Truth rests deeper than we think. Then he walks forward, the case behind him, the pattern of its quiet details etched into his memory. Not everything aligns neatly. Not every answer feels complete. But sometimes, finding truth means learning to see what lies beneath the surface. In silence, in caution. In the small shifts that change everything.